From Caracas, I'm Cody Weddle. It was in late December that both the President of the United States, Barack Obama, and the President of Cuba, Raul Castro, took to the airwaves in their countries for a scene we really hadn't seen in decades, a historic change in the relationship between Cuba and the United States. Today I'm joined by Dr. Esteban Miguel Morales Dominguez. He is a member of the National Council of UNEAC. He holds 2 PhDs, one in science and one as an economic sciences research professor, and he has also studied extensively the relationships between the United States and Cuba. And today he's going to analyze these changes, the historic changes, but also what remains unchanged between these two countries. Mr. Morales Dominguez, thanks so much for joining us and adding your perspective.
Thank you for the invitation. Well, my perspective is the moment is a historical moment for the Cuban-U.S. relation, because for the first time in 54 years, the United States and Cuba sit at the conversation table to negotiate the different issues between the two countries. For this reason, I think this is a very important moment in the history of the Cuban-U.S. relation.
So historic changes, what do you see as the most significant changes between the two countries?
Well, the most significant change is the opportunity to negotiate the relation between the two countries. Inside of this negotiation, there is a group of issues very important. The first issue, a more important issue for Cuba, is the issue of the blockade. In the United States set embargo. We set blockade. The blockade is very significant in the economic history of Cuba in the last 50 years.
And the blockade remains in place. That hasn't been changed. Is that correct?
Yes, the president said the blockade will be eliminated in the negotiation with the Congress of the United States. But the blockade is still. The blockade not disappeared yet. The blockade continues and will be negotiated with the Congress. Also, the President Obama said about that again in the 22 January in his speech about the Union Federation. He said the blockade, we must to begin working to eliminate the blockade toward Cuba. And this is very important for Cuba. The second issue is the issue of immigration. Between Cuba and the United States was a large conversation about the immigration. We can say that we advanced in this issue in the negotiation with the United States. But there's still certain problems inside of this issue of immigration. The first problem is the United States maintained the adjustment law of 1966. Across the adjustment law of 1966, the illegal immigration is very stimulated from Cuba.
It's the law stimulates immigration for Cubans
yes.
To the United States.
Yes, illegal.
Incentivizes that.
In illegal form. In illegal form. Because beside to this adjustment law, this is the politics of foot dry and foot wet.
Wet foot, dry foot.
Yes. And this is a big stimulus. The other problems inside of the immigration issue is the problem to the politics of parole, the parole to benefits the possibility to the immigration of our physician outside and our technique outside. They can go to the embassy in the United States, and they can receive the parole visa to go to the United States. This affected many Cuba, and not only affected Cuba, affected the country that Cuba give their service, their technical service.
So if those Cubans, those physicians, technicians are in a country other than Cuba working as a physician, they can go to the embassy of the United States and receive residency in the U.S.?
Yes, they, after 1 year and 1 day, they receive the residence in the United States. After that, they can to receive, after some years, also the nationality of the United States. This law is a facility only for the Cubans. Other countries in the world have not this privilege of the adjustment law, give only the Cubans. And the other issue is the problem of the United States don't go back, all the people that they catch in high sea. These people, sometimes they go back to Cuba, sometimes they not go back to Cuba. This issue stimulated the illegal immigration from Cuba to the United States. Really, there is other problem, the problem of illegal documents inside of the process of immigration. Also, in the last conversation, the two countries agreed to preparing a special commission to debate this problem of the problem of illegal documents inside of the process of immigration. The process of immigration is very important to Cuba. The other issue very important to Cuba is Cuba is in the list of the terrorist country. Really, the United States cannot justify this issue, but they maintain Cuba in the list of the terrorist country. This affects many Cuba because the presence of Cuba in the list of the terrorist country support the blockade against Cuba. Mm-hmm. It's other issue to support the blockade against Cuba. The other issue very important to Cuba is the Guantanamo base, where I think the two countries are in this position to negotiate the presence of Guantanamo base in Cuba. This problem of the Guantanamo base is very important. But it's important too, inside of this process of negotiation, the more important is the blockade. Mm-hmm. With these three issues, I think negative, in my personal opinion, will be nothing easy to negotiate the diplomatic relation between Cuba and the United States. The future of the Cuban-U.S. relation is complicated because to obtain the possibility of the immediately diplomatic relation is not so complex, but it's very complex arrive to the possibility of the normalization between Cuba and the United States. The normalization of the relation between Cuba and the United States, in my sense, is not possible. It's maintaining these three principal issues: the blockade, the problem of immigration, and Cuba in the list of the terrorist countries.
What do we know that will change already? We know that trade will be opened up to some extent from the United States, between the United States and Cuba. Tourism from the United States to Cuba, to an extent, not completely, will also be opened up. Which of those, we've also heard talk of embassies opening in Havana and the United States. What do you find significant in those changes that we know will happen in the relationship between the two countries?
The possibility to open the embassy of the United States in Havana and Cuba in Washington, I think is a very important issue because this embassy can facilitate the process of negotiation. It's the logistics, very important to the process of negotiation between the two countries, because the two countries will negotiate at the position of the reorganize the diplomatic relation between Cuba and the United States. This is very important. The other issue very important is the two countries are in interest of to negotiate many issues of the relation of Cuba and the United States. The other issue very important, at the last, after 54 years, Cuba and the United States are sitting in the negotiation table. This is a very, very, very important. Cuba resists the aggressive politics of the United States during a long time, but at the end, the United States consider the possibility to negotiate their difference with Cuba. I think this is a very important. This is a more important issue in the history of the Cuba-U.S. relation in the last 54 years.
So just the fact that they are sitting down together and negotiating is a huge change between the two countries. And let's talk about that a little more. The negotiations, we got news about how these negotiations leading up to the agreement came about. We heard that there was help from Canada, help from the Vatican. The talks began shortly after President Obama won re-election in 2012. Were you surprised by the extent of these negotiations that led up to establishing negotiations with help from Canada and the Vatican?
In my personal opinion, and I wrote about this issue many in the last month in Cuba, step by step, the United States and Cuba are more near of the current process of the negotiation. But I must say, I never think can be so rapidly. The President Obama, December 17, present the idea about the negotiation of the Cuban-U.S. relation. The President Raúl Castro accept this idea. And only 1 month later, the Obama take some measures about the possibility to amplify the remittance to Cuba, the possibility to use a credit card, the possibility to amplify the travel between Cuba and the United States, the possibility of the certain commerce between Cuba and the United States, import and export, certain facility to the media property, private property in Cuba. And I think the President is hurry in this movement toward Cuba, because they know they have less than 2 years in the President, and he must be very rapidly. But the agenda of the President received a very good acceptation inside of the United States and the international level. They accept many. Also, the popularity of the President increased in the last months because the issue of Cuba, the possibility to arrangement the relation between Cuba and the United States, they weigh for many people in Latin America and Caribbean and in the world, and wait for the many people inside of the United States too. In my opinion, the step of the President to negotiate the relation with Cuba was very, very important step of the President Obama.
Let's talk about what took so long. Why did it take so long to get to this point? We've seen the United Nations has continually voted against or in condemning the U.S. blockade on Cuba, the U.S. policy towards Cuba. I've often heard that a big factor that has prevented the U.S. changing its policy has been the Cuban population, the Cuban immigrant population living in Cuba, which historically was opposed to changing of the policy. Do you think that was the most significant factor that took so long, that forced this to take so long? Do you agree with that?
Well, the condemn inside of the United Nations play, I think, important role. Play important role. this condemn is only politics, moral. It's not a law, but I think play very important role. Play very important role to the Latin American and Caribbean countries, because at the end they said to the President Obama, we don't go to the meeting of the Latin American and Caribbean if you cannot erase the relation with Cuba. This is very important. Was a pressure from the Latin American and Caribbean countries toward the United States. But the more important issue inside of this change is the resistances of Cuba in front of the aggressive policy of the United States. Cuba resists for more than 50 years the aggressive policy of the United States. This plays a very important role. The other issue is also inside of the United States. Step by step, after the Elian case, the situation of the relation between Cuba and the United States advanced step by step for the negotiation. This is a conclusion of the behavior of the American population in front of the Cuba-United States, of the relation Cuba-United States. Step by step, became more popularity inside of the United States, the necessity of change the policies of the United States toward Cuba.
With the Cuban population in the United States?
The Cuban population of the United States play, step by step, play very important role too. Also today, more than 52% of the people is agree with the restore the relation between Cuba and the United States.
The Cuban population or the entire population?
No, the Cuban American population.
Okay.
It was a poll of a Cuban American population, more than 52. And there is also Republicans of the party, Republican Party, there is agree too with the new relation between Cuba and the U.S. They support the agenda of the president for the new relation between Cuba and the U.S. And I think step by step, many people and many sectors also of the American society, we can say, for example, the academic the academic sector or the religion sector, they are agree with this process of the debate about the Cuban-U.S. relation during many years increased the popularity of this issue inside of the American society.
So what do you think will happen now? The delegation, U.S. delegation, traveled to Cuba. You've mentioned what remains to be done. Do you think the blockade will be lifted? What do you expect to see in the next few years?
The blockade will be the more difficult issue.
Because it requires
congressional approval.
Right.
Will be very complex issue. This is the more important issue for Cuba. But in general, the two delegations are agreed to continue the conversation. They said the conversation was very good of the two countries. They go back to the United States with the idea to go back to Cuba again to continue the conversation, to open the embassy, very important because Mr. Kerry is waiting for this. And third is very important, the two delegations catch very clear where is the contradiction, the more important contradiction between the two countries. I think the delegation of the United States catch very clear where is the contradiction with Cuba. Cuba catch very clear where is the contradiction with the United States. Because the United States now want to negotiate other issues. They said, the President Obama also said, they can to come to Cuba, they must to come to Cuba to promote the civil society inside of Cuba. They have interest to negotiate the problem of individual liberty, the problem of human rights, and the problem of democracy. But this negotiation will be complicated. Will be complicated because Cuba said, and I agree, the United States cannot come to Cuba only to say you must respect the human rights, you must respect the liberty, you must respect the democracy. If the United States is in interest to negotiate this issue, they must put over the table the problem of human rights, individual liberty, and democracy inside of the United States too. Because the negotiation must be in the equal condition. No conditioned negotiation, and with the respect for the Cuban sovereignty. Cuba respects the American sovereignty, but the United States must respect the Cuban sovereignty too. I think the United States cannot come to Cuba and say, you must respect the human right. Mm-hmm. Yes, but United States, you have problem of human right too. You have problem of individual liberty too. You have problem of democracy too.
And we've heard recently heard more news about the extent of U.S. human rights violations in Cuba at the Guantanamo Bay facility.
Exactly. There is other issue. From the counter-revolution after 1959, across the invasion of Bay of Pigs, across the problem of the missile crisis in 1962, across the counter-revolutionary band in 1963, all the attack of the United States toward Cuba, they no respect the human rights in Cuba.
And very quickly, we have about 3 minutes. I've heard some people say that they believe that Cuba now faces an even bigger challenge, people who support the Cuban Revolution. How does the revolution continue now that now that we see that relations may be normalizing between these two countries?
Well, I think Cuba, for a long time, lived on the influence of the United States. This influence is large influence in the history of Cuba. And this influence continues. But Cuba must construct her society under this situation. I think if the United States really negotiate the normalization of the relation between Cuba and the United States, Cuba has opportunity to continue ahead with this program, economic program and political program of Cuba. Because Cuba has a plan to perfection in the Cuban society. I see the perfection of Cuban society will be more easy under a new policy of the United States than under old politics of the United States. Because the old politics of the United States was very aggressive. And was a policy continuous again to stop the possibility of Cuba constructing a new economic model. If the United States can now negotiate with Cuba in the Pacific Forum, with the respect between the two countries, with the interest to normalize the relation between the two countries, the situation of Cuba will be more easy to continue the process of perfection of the Cuban society.
All right, Dr. Esteban Miguel Morales Dominguez, thanks so much for joining us, for your perspective. Very interesting. I wish we could continue, but that's all the time we have for today.
Thank you for the invitation.
From Caracas, I'm Cody Weddle. We will see you again next week.